This week, Kumar reads a large chunk of a series he had read little of before, the long-running British comic Judge Dredd, and he compares notes with longtime Dredd reader Matt. The comic defied a lot of Kumar's expectations, so stay tuned to hear what he expected and how it actually read to him. First, if you appreciate the work we do on deconstructing comics and our other podcasts, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Kumar.
This is Matt.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. I'm here with Matt in the same room, but so we were just talking about this before we started recording. We haven't done an episode with you, I'm going to say 8 or 9 years. I think it was Love and Rockets. And then I've been very out of touch with you for a long time. And somehow it just became time in my brain to hit Judge Dredd. I was trying to do some kind of European comics in a previous episode. I was trying to do the Valerian and Laureline comics, and that episode kind of fell apart for various reasons, and we didn't record it. But my brain was still on that side of the ocean, and I was thinking Judge Dredd. But I remember when I went to your house that one time, and I saw your shelves, you had the full collection of essential Judge Dredds. It looked like at the time. And my feeling was that, okay, Matt's kind of he's like an avant-garde comics kind of guy who's more underground, and Judge Dredd is as overground as you can get without being American overground, I would say. It's really mainstream British comics. So I was kind of just surprised that they were there. And then when I emailed you and said, do you want to do this episode? You said, yeah, I'm happy with anything up to like Prague 800. And so you actually referred to them not by stories, but by like the issue numbers, up to 900 or up to 800 or 700, whatever it was. So I'm like, okay, this is hardcore. So I'm guessing you were getting these in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were available on the shelves, just.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Before that portion of the UK comics industry died off, where the sort of mass distributed comics, and I mean there's still a few today in the UK and the rest of the world, but when I was a kid, I think it must have been about 38 cents a comic,
Right.
So it was just brilliant entertainment.
Okay, so how old do you think you were when you started reading this?
I was around about 6 or 7. It was early 80s.
Okay.
It was, my dad gave me Prog 4 and Prog 9.
Okay.
And
it was like ground floor, like right at the beginning.
Yeah. So, those had come out a little bit earlier, but I was reading them maybe 3 or 4 years after they'd come out. And then he took me to get a new issue, from the newsagent, and it was around about maybe 260. So it was in the middle of the Apocalypse War, I think, at that point.
Okay.
So
I was trying to think about it, like what was my exposure to Judge Dredd, and it was only like the Anthrax song, "I Am the Law," and Judgment on Gotham, the Batman crossover from 1990, I want to say.
Yep.
Were like the only. I was thinking maybe, because I used to buy some of those quality reprints of Alan Moore stories too, so maybe I touched a Dredd story or two in there, but almost nothing. And I saw the horrific Sylvester Stallone movie, so I knew almost nothing. I was really kind of scratching my brains when I started the episodes. Like, how do I feel like I know more about Judge Dredd?
You've read nothing over the years?
No, and the funny thing was, as I was reading it, and we read a huge chunk. I read a huge chunk for this episode of various storylines. My expectations were constantly. It was defying my expectations at every turn. So I kind of came in and I was expecting it to be like. I was expecting it to be really fascist without knowing it, like Batman comics. Like, there's this rich white dude that's going around beating up poor people, and the writers don't realize what they're writing, but that's actually what it is. And pretty soon, I think Wagner, I think he knew almost right off the bat that he was writing a fascist character. And later on, it becomes really clear that Dredd is the villain of the stories, not the hero of them. So that was kind of surprising. That was the biggest surprise for me. I really thought it was going to be just kind of fun adventure stories, and it kind of is at first, but there's stuff under the surface like that. There's a really early, maybe in the first couple of progs, there's a story about this robot revolution, right? And do you remember this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so there's these robots rise up in revolt, and Judge Dredd, he puts down the revolt, and he's like, go back to, your robots, go back to being slaves. Now, they literally use the word slaves. And these robots have emotions. And I'm like, is nobody really considering this? And then very shortly afterwards, we get to this Cursed Earth storyline where he goes out into the wastelands in order to cross the country, and he meets these enslaved aliens. And he's like, this is wrong. You can't enslave aliens like this. I was like, what's really going on here? And then later on you realize his thing is he follows the letter of the law.
Yeah.
He enforces the law. So if the law says robots are slaves, and then he finds this moral ground, and he says, well, your slaves, go back to being slaves. And if it's wrong, if the law says you can't enslave aliens, he's like, that's wrong. You guys are going to jail for enslaving these aliens. And it's really, and I was like, do the writers not realize it? But as the further you get into it, it becomes very clear that I think Wagner really knew. I think he understood completely the paradoxes that were going on in that robot story. And
that robot story was in one of those first two that my dad gave me, or the very beginning of it, and it starts with one of the masters saying to his robot, you're my slave, step into these fires and be melted. And he's like, well, I don't want to, but I'm a slave, so I'm going to do it. And Judge Dredd's watching, and he says to one of the other judges, maybe this isn't a great thing, but, there are slaves, so whatever. At least that's how I remember it.
Yeah.
And, but it's like you say, like there's a hard line of, like for the character, he's sort of unflinching. He has to always follow the law. He can't change. The law can change, but he can't. So, I mean, as the characters evolved and the storylines have evolved over the years, certain laws have changed. Sometimes it is provoking, but he has to stick to that line. And what you're saying about the fascist stuff as well, I was just listening to John Wagner recently. He was on a 45th anniversary for 2000 AD, and he was saying when he sort of found that kids were treating Judge Dredd as the hero, which
right.
I was when I was a kid. I didn't understand the deeper context of everything, but he said he made an effort to put more of that into the stories where he's putting his fascistic authority
right.
on things that are like the way they have simple codes of law that if people break things like littering and that there's deadly consequences, or jaywalking,
right.
So yeah, he definitely wanted to push more in that direction.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too about the character evolving. So we haven't described anything about what Judge Dredd is. I don't know if anybody doesn't know what Judge Dredd is, but it's possible. I mean, I had very little exposure myself, but it's set in the future in this a city that's called Mega City 1, which is basically the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. There is also a Mega City 2, which is the western seaboard. But, it's got hundreds of millions of people in this one giant city, and we've got these judges who are actually judge, jury, and executioner. Early on, it seemed like he mentioned once or twice that they don't kill people outright, but later on, he's just killing people if he's decided. But immediately, judge, jury, executioner, as soon as you say that, okay, you're in a fascist setting. Now, there's not much more to say than that about it, really. But the interesting thing to me was you talked about the evolution of the character, but it's so... Another thing that struck me when I started reading it was it's so not American. I mean, it's set in New York, or ostensibly, New York to Miami or whatever, this giant city. But unlike an American comic, he's very, especially in the early issues, we should say he's created by John Wagner and Carlos Ezquerra. He's very lean. He's not a muscly guy. There's no real fetishization of the motorbike and the gun. The gun is called the Lawgiver.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if the bike has a name, but it's the bike can do Lawmaster. That's right. The Lawmaster has he can do remote control stuff, but that's never like. It's never like Thunderbirds. Like, that's the main thing of the story is we're going to see the bike. I can't wait to see the bike do some remote control stuff. It's just there's just sometimes he uses it to his advantage. So there's none of that kind of stuff you would associate with Batman, where all the gear is. There's a lot of focus on the gear kind of stuff. You never see his face. So he never takes his mask off. We don't know anything about him. Now, I read, I think 4 or 5 storylines. I read like the Robots and the Cursed Earth and Apocalypse War and America and maybe something else, but we never learn anything about his background. And I think only in Judgment on Gotham, Judge Anderson refers to him as Joe Dredd, and I'm like, oh, is Joe actually his name?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's at some point around issue 600 or something. They're like, his name is Joe.
It definitely came up earlier, and there was like, because I mean the tradition in UK comics in the up till probably the early 90s was that they would release a hardcover annual book every year. And I think in one of the 2000 AD annuals, there's like a profile of him where he had his name, which might have been mentioned in the strip, but he also had his age. This is around maybe 1980, I think. Okay. And I think they sort of established at that point he was 31 or early 30s.
Well, that's important too, because the strip, at least in the beginning, seems to be going in real time.
Yeah, it still is.
So in fact, the essential trade paperbacks are like the year 2199 to 21200 or something like that. Like each volume is 1 year of real.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it matches up 1 year of their time. I think it might be slightly askew in terms of a year of our time, a year of their time. But he's definitely aging. Like there's no sort of. It's not like he's Batman who's been the same age since 1930 something or other.
So is he like in his 60s or 70s?
Maybe early 70s perhaps.
Okay, wow.
Currently. And then, it's the future, so there's a lot of medical procedures that can keep you young. Yeah. But, and also, I mean, I don't know how anybody could have been through so much in their life and still be alive, but obviously he is. But he, he's starting to feel it. You start to get internal monologues where he's sort of addressing maybe he's not as good as he was at his job,
Yeah, but we don't know anything about like why he's a judge, why he wanted to become a judge or anything like that. We don't know. And you see, anytime if you're an aspiring writer and you read like how to write, how to create characters, it's always like, okay, what's your character's favorite music? Who are their parents? Where did they come from? There's none of that in Judge Dredd. It's really interesting to me. But he's not even a character that you can... Maybe in the early days you could have projected yourself as a reader onto him. I certainly think that's not true later on. And there's only... there's that... One of the ones I read was that Garth Ennis one that followed America, and he's like, I love this city. Is a line in one of his monologues, and I'm like, wait, why does he love it? What is it about this city that he loves? It's such a weird little line that Garth Ennis tried to put some personality into him that doesn't even seem to fit. Like, there's nothing to love about Mega City 1. It doesn't seem like a reason to enforce the law.
Well, I mean, in that same story, he's interrogating another judge, and she's been found guilty of some conspiracy. Anyway, she sort of says, what her frustration is. She's been in the job 15 years, and what's in it for her?
Yeah.
What's in it for doing this job where, they're basically monks. There's no life outside of enforcing the law, and for him, that's what life is, enforcing the law. And they address it with, I think it might have been he's talking to a younger clone version of himself and just saying that, like this is enjoyment for him being a judge. I can't remember the specific words, but he says like there's nothing more that in life that he'd want to do.
Right.
I mean, they do get into the backstory of him as a human being further along the line, and that's all done with John Wagner and Carlos Ezquerra. I don't know if we want to get into that because it is a bit further along the line, and I mean it's all been shaped by John Wagner, and typically in tandem with Ezquerra if he could get him, but they do, but they really lay it out in detail at one point where you've got sort of where he's come from since birth, and some of that was actually, I mean, some of it was in that Sylvester Stallone film. I guess, I don't know if you remember the situation with the chief judge in that Fargo.
I remember anything that happened in the movie. I sat in a theater and saw it, but
I'll give you the cliff notes. Basically,
Right.
there's the founding father of the whole justice system is a guy, Fargo, I think it's Eustace, might be saying that wrong, but anyway, and Judge Dredd is a clone of him. And then there's other clones of him, and possibly clones of Judge Dredd, although they never really specifically say.
I did guess there was something about cloning, because sometimes people mention their clone mothers, whatever that means, and I'm like, okay, so there's something going on here,
Yes.
Oh, and there is a line, something about they're chosen for their physical abilities. I took a note about it, but I can't remember
is
now.
that from when he is going to enforce some statute to get two kids to be enrolled in the Law Academy?
No, I think it was.
I know. He
but they say like judges are chosen for their physical attributes, or there's something like that, or But at least in the early days, there wasn't much.
Well, I mean, typically people can enroll their kids in the Law Academy. I mean, 5 is the age. So I mean, who knows what what you're going to become as an adult when you're 5? But you get, I think it's about 15 years of training to become a judge, and there's a lot of assessment along the way where you can get flunked out and you don't.
Okay. Right. So we at least early days, we don't know his origin. He has no muscles. He's like very lean. But he has a reputation. Everybody kind of knows, Judge Dredd's coming. Even in Russia, they know who he is. East
Meg 1?
East Meg 1 or whatever it's called. They know, they've heard of Judge Dredd. Yeah. They know his reputation. Also wanted to mention, too, that John Wagner, often writing under a pseudonym in the credit boxes on these stories, and I think maybe you know better, but my guess when I saw the T.B. Grover name comes up a lot. A lot of stories are written by T.B. Grover, which is actually just John Wagner, or John Wagner and Alan Grant working together. Yeah. But my guess is they just wanted to make it seem like they were a really big operation, not 4 guys in an office pumping out this comic book.
Yeah, I think some of it also is to pacify the people higher up in the organization. It's sense. We don't have one guy writing everything, there's a bunch of employees. Right. Because if it was just one, then he's cashing too many paychecks.
Well, that's a real corporations hate that, especially at DC. That they want to have replaceable parts, and they don't want the fans to be too hooked onto one person or any artist or writer, because then that person can start asking for more money, etc. So all that sort of stuff.
And they were very, DC and Marvel look very progressive compared to IPC and Fleetway, who, it was often... it was 2080 that kind of changed things to a huge degree. Kevin O'Neill brought in credit boxes, because prior to 2080 in English comics, often, you might recognise an art style, but they'd never give them credits. And
I don't think even in US comics in 77?
77 was when it started.
When it started, I don't think... There were a lot of credit boxes.
Yeah.
Maybe? Marvel did, for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know about DC. They were still...
you wouldn't get cover credits or anything then.
Right.
But yeah, 2080 kind of changed it. And I think part of it is just you just had such a stellar lineup of talent, of artists and writers, that you recognise them, because they all had such idiosyncratic styles anyway. But it was pretty notable.
Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about, that we planned to talk about, was The Cursed Earth, because this is one I went online. I was like, what are the best Judge Dredd stories? And I just picked the ones that came up the most often on all these different lists. And that Cursed Earth I knew because it was mentioned in the Anthrax song "I Am the Law." So I had some hooks in some of these. I was like, okay, I know what this is. Okay, so another amazing thing that happened is as I was reading was I kept seeing stuff that turned up in other media 15 years later or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the one, and this one was the Jurassic Park storyline.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got these. This Cursed Earth was, I think, 1980. We've got these as Dredd has to deliver this antidote or this. There's like this virus that's ravaging Megacity 2, so he's got to transport the cure. I don't remember. Oh yeah, the airports were shut down, so he has to go. He has to physically cross. He has to travel by land, and he had to deliver the cure. So they encounter all this kind of fun stuff along the way. One of the things is they come to this park, where a amusement park, where they have used dinosaur DNA to grow full-size dinosaurs that people can just go and hang around in the park with. And I'm like, is it for real?
Yeah.
This isn't. And I looked it up, and even Michael Crichton didn't even write that book until the book didn't come out until a year before the movie. So that's like 1990
Oh, really?
or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure about the timeline for the book.
Sure, Westworld was like in the 70s, but it was like almost note for note the same thing.
Maybe Crichton was getting the progs shipped over to him. And well, if that's the case, because I mean, the fascinating thing with that dinosaur thing is they tied into an earlier strip from the very first prog, which was Flesh.
Right.
It was about traveling in time because there's not enough food in the future, so we'll go back and harvest dinosaurs. And they have like one of the dinosaurs is the son of the primary protagonist of that strip, and I think that was maybe one of the first times for me where they were starting to connect the dots between. You know, maybe all these stories are happening in the same universe, but in different time periods, and that. So that was quite fascinating.
I didn't see anything else like that in the stories I read, though, and I did. For some reason, I looked that up, and I did find, because I think I was trying to find out the Jurassic Park connection or something. But anyway, yeah, I did find. Oh yeah, this is another 2000 AD character. This dinosaur is a character, but I didn't notice any other crossover kind of stuff. And it would be easy because they didn't really have to jump through too many hoops with the Batman crossover, because it's just like, oh, we have these dimensional teleporters, we'll just go to the dimensional department and they'll send us to Gotham City, no problem. They could have done more, but again, it's not an American sensibility. I don't think they were like, Dredd has to meet Saulnier or Torquemada or something like that. Yeah. So this is the one with the alien slavery where I was shocked that he was like, really, he was quite noble in this one, in Cursed Earth. I find he was really, he was more heroic, what we think of as heroic. He was like trying to defend the underdogs. Yeah. The underdog just happened to be the ones that were being trampled on by the lawbreakers. I think that's why he was, because in other stories he's literally beating up underdogs because they're fighting for democracy or whatever. So this is fascinating to me.
It is. I guess it's a bit of a contradiction, but I mean, I guess that was one of the first sort of mega epics. But I mean, that Robot Wars one was kind of one as well. But this one was chiefly Mike McMahon and Brian Boland sort of trading off on art chores. So I guess they planned the whole thing out. You draw these episodes, I'll pick up here and use your character designs for that one, and vice versa. And I think that the whole that alien and the slavery storyline part of it was, I guess, a chance to show another aspect of his character. But I think the other thing is that at the time these were coming out, there was no expectation that people would be reading it now.
Right.
They're printed on this tawdry newsprint, and they're disposable,
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that too, because I need to know what it's like reading something like the Apocalypse War on cheap newsprint. Like,
it's great. I mean, I reread it, before this in colour on an iPad, and it was great. I mean, it was fine, but reading it in black and white on a weekly instalment basis was quite exciting, and especially some of the cliffhangers in that where you're just like, what is going to happen next?
But the stories were just so massive, and there's literally a panel where 500 million people get killed, which we'll talk about when we get to it. And I'm like, you're reading this on cheap newsprint that's not going to survive to the weekend. Like, it's going to disintegrate, and like it's amazing to me that their ideas were so huge. They didn't seem to be. The 2000 AD crew didn't seem to be like, well, this is just cheap newsprint. Let's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they were thinking about posterity, as you said.
No.
But
also,
I think they weren't limiting themselves by saying this is like 38 cents, I think you said it was.
Yeah.
You know,
and even cheaper, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, like, I think at some point they were like, we're not writing for kids anymore. We're making this for adult readers.
Right.
Even though it's still being published in a kid's comic and put on the newsstand next to Beano and Dandy.
I felt that in Cursed Earth. So this was the first... Like, the robot stuff was... Okay, that's a bit weird that he wants the robots to be slaves, even though they have emotions. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
We get to Cursed Earth, and we get to the fast food wars, which weren't reprinted for many years due to fear of lawyers, I guess.
Yeah.
And it is really funny. I think there's a satirical edge in the early Robot Revolution stuff, especially with the name. What was the name of that robot?
Call Me Kenneth?
Call Me Kenneth. Yeah, so they're constantly referring to him as Call Me Kenneth.
Yeah.
So there's some funny stuff in there, and also Wagner seems to love the ethnic accents, like the housekeeper and stuff, and his Italian housekeeper or landlady.
Yeah.
And it's like whenever she shows up, it's like, okay, this is a bit crazy. Then there's that one Spanish judge that shows up, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of a... Ezquerra is there.
Yeah. I think that was a take on Ezquerra. Like, it was, it kind of physically looked like him. I don't know if it's been... That was a Bolin strip, I think.
It might have been.
Yeah.
But it's almost like...
It, but yeah.
It wasn't really... It wasn't... What am I trying to say? There wasn't anything bad-natured about it. I mean, it might be unintentionally offensive, but it wasn't deliberately a little bit. But anyway, so there's some kind of funny stuff in there. But the fast food wars was hilarious and weird, and just that really biting satire that I was like, are any kids gonna care about this? And it's pretty... I don't remember what Prague's
for that
Cursed Earth was. It's like early, like 61 to 85, yeah. So...
Well, I was a kid when I was reading those. I didn't read them when they came out, but it was maybe 2 or 3 years afterwards, and I didn't get it. I didn't get any of that stuff, and even like we were saying about the fascist overtones and that, I didn't really understand it.
Sure.
But, probably by the time I was a teenager and rereading them, I was like, oh, okay, all right.
So we've got this Ronald McDonald type clown and a Burger King who's literally just called Burger King. They haven't changed his name or anything.
Yeah.
And they're at war out in this apocalyptic wasteland. And it was so funny and bizarre, and as I said, those 3 or 4 chapters were cut. And there's also a Colonel Sanders type character that I think Bolin decided to draw as Colonel Sanders for no reason. Like, he's not supposed to be Colonel Sanders. He's running this this factory where he's cloning all of these kind of like product mascots out there, and like the Jolly Green Giant is another one, and I don't know. It was reprinted in 2016. Finally, I don't know how they bypassed.
I think there was a change in the law, but also because it was never an outright. I think it was just for, like you say, for fear of litigation.
Right.
So there were a few things, like they reprinted Zenith, which they hadn't reprinted in years because it was dubious whether Grant Morrison and Steve Yale had owned the copyright.
Okay.
And I don't even know, to be honest. I don't think that's really been made public. But they have reprinted it, and like you say, they reprinted those banned issues.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I thought that was all great stuff. Like, I mean, that whole storyline was just, they just went in such outlandish directions.
Yeah.
And it's a great plot. They need to get from this city to this other city to save that city. So anything could happen in between.
Yeah.
And they went for it. And like you say, with, using Colonel Sanders' likeness, because of the ephemeral nature of what they're producing, no one's going to see it, presumably. But they are, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Judge Dredd had some empathy for these creations of Colonel Sanders, that they were innocent, they had been created, and they they weren't in control of their actions, something like that. But again, I was like always going back to the robots, going, Wagner knows that this is contradictory, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the alien tweak that joins him in that storyline, and you get a bit of a his backstory and, you know, where he's come from and how he's ended up there. And man, it's like I thought that was brilliant when I was a kid. I was just like, oh, I feel so much for the experiences of this alien.
Yeah.
And you see that he says at one point, you know, like he sort of tells his story, and Dredd's like, you know, should you trust this criminal that he spoke to? Spike's Harvey Rodden, and he says it doesn't matter because, you know, that guy's not going to be around. But he's, you know, why are you telling Dredd? Dredd's like, he says, well, you're a good person, you know. So there's I guess he's got a you know, a mental connection with people. He can sort of deduce that there's a moral compass with Dredd that he can trust. You know?
Right.
So, I thought that stuff was brilliant. You know?
Right.
Coming up, Kumar and Matt discuss the stories The Day the Law Died and Apocalypse War, the over-the-top body count, and cultural and linguistic things in the comic that don't seem to jibe with it taking place in the United States. But first, a reminder to join us for trivia quizzes, reviews of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko, and more. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange?
Okay, so they come back from the wasteland, and the next one I had on our list was The Day the Law Died. So this is another one that came up on a lot of lists. This is also one of the judges, the chief. He becomes chief judge, ends up taking supreme power and becoming a almost Roman-style dictator. I think he even wears a cape, like a kind of Julius Caesar type cape at one stage. But he's completely insane. He has a fish in a bowl, like in a fish bowl that he promotes to a judge. He makes one judge like go around in his underwear to take his uniform off because he doesn't deserve it. And the rest of the storyline, that judge never wears clothes, and another one's in a dress and stuff like this. So similar, but you said you quite like this one too, right?
Yeah, that's probably one of my all-time favorites, because I think at the time that I was reading the Apocalypse War, I was just starting to pick up those back issues. I was going around garage sales, I was reading newspaper adverts for comics for sale, as you did back in the 80s. And so I was reading some of it out of sequence, but I was like, oh, this is all part of that Judge Cal. I mean, he's Judge Caligula, based off the Roman Emperor, and in some ways he's far more extreme than perhaps the real Caligula was, but you know, there's only so much they can put in a kid's comic, I say in quotations. But yeah, that, I think you sort of got the danger of the situation, because they're killing characters left, right, and centre, and and even the citizens as well. I think there's a few points in there where it's like, all right, the whole city's going to be killed. Oh no, I take that back. And then a couple of days later, no, I've decided we're going to kill everyone. And it really comes down to it's Dredd and a handful of people on his side versus the whole justice system. And that's pretty exciting when you're a kid.
Yeah, and then they find out there's the other judges are going along with it, and there's a kind of mystery about why are they going along with it, and why aren't they rebelling? Why aren't they they killing Caligula or whatever. Lots of funny stuff in this one, like the Clegs, these aliens that he's hired. They do this dance of death in one issue. It's really funny. They sing the song about killing Judge Dredd, or I think it was. All sorts of funny stuff, and the stuff like about the fish. It just seems so overtop and crazy, but at the same time, Judge Cal orders this purge. So millions of people we hear die in this purge, and he decides to build a wall around the city, which we've heard before in the last few years somebody tried to do this.
I did not make that connection, but that's true.
And it's funny because that wall stays up in later storylines.
Yeah.
They mention it. It's not like a thing that goes away at the end of the story. It's still there. They don't dismantle it. There is a wall around Mega City 1. Because
that's the other thing, is there's a massive continuity.
Yeah.
And I've seen some of the modern writers other than Wagner go back to stories like Cursed Earth and Day the Lord Died, and just take little elements. Like there was the sort of floating death field, I can't remember exactly what it was called in Cursed Earth, towards the beginning of the story, where they're flying over to Mega City 2, and there's like rats and things living up on these floating rocks in the sky, and that becomes like the setting for one of the most recent stories.
Okay.
By Will Sampson.
Okay.
So like you say with the wall, that's sort of ever present from that story onwards, and it gets destroyed and damaged many times, but it always goes back up,
Yeah, so the thing that I found interesting about this one was, more than the others, there was a lot of funny stuff. Like, there's a bit where they're auditioning Dredds. Like, Cal's trying to find a replacement Dredd to show that Dredd's... I think he thinks Dredd is dead, but he wants like a patsy that he can control to mimic him, but he's got like a dwarf, and like these guys look just nothing ridiculous. Like Dredd. It's just ridiculous. It's really funny.
Yeah.
But there was such a dark edge to it. Like just casually, 2 million people have died in these purges or whatever that he's had, and that kind of, it ramps up into, I feel like and Judge Schmaltz's death, I really was just this hilarious moment, and the Judge Fernandez, the Ezquerra type, is in this storyline as well. So all that stuff was so funny, but it was kind of, there was a dark part, and then we kind of lead into Apocalypse War, which I think is, and Blockmania, which is not too much later. Let me look. So Day the Law Died was 89 to 108.
Yeah, it feels like maybe...
Apocalypse War is 236. Okay, so we're almost... It's a couple of years later in real time.
50 issues a year, so...
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to characterize Apocalypse War, so I usually, when I'm planning an episode with somebody, I say, hey, do you want to talk about this? I send them an email. They're like, yeah, let's meet on this date and do it. And then there's usually no interaction in between. But I was in such shock reading every page of Apocalypse War that I actually emailed you, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening in this comic. I think you've become so used to, you're so indoctrinated into things resetting at the end of a comic book storyline.
Yeah.
And Apocalypse War, every time was like, okay, so for whatever reason... this was also, really shocking considering current events. Eastmake 1 just decides we're going to wipe out Mega City 1. So basically Russia's like, or the Soviet Union at that point is like, we're going to get rid of these guys. I don't remember what their motivation was, really.
Well, they wanted the city. I guess they wanted...
Yes, they wanted the city, and they were...
And the idea was they were going to get Mega City 2 and Mega City 3. Like,
yes.
I can't remember if it's the Bulgarian character or Kazan, but one of them says, like, after being on the, phone to the other chief judges, yeah, look, we're not going to attack you guys, it's fine. I mean, like you say, you could talk about what's happening in modern day, but we're only after Mega City 1. That's all we want, you know. But the idea is that, once they get that, that's going to be their base to head over to the western side.
I think there's Dredd is like... at one stage he's like, there's a fear that the population is going to be enslaved. So they know that the Russians are not going to wipe out the population. Now they do shoot nukes, and this is one of those things where it's like, oh, they're going to stop the nukes. Dredd's going to find some way to stop these nukes from hitting the U.S. No, the nukes hit them. Yeah. And we know there's been a World War III because that's what led to the Cursed Earth. and led to the rise of the judges after the last president or whatever. So actually, it's another thing I should have mentioned earlier. There are people who in living memory remember democracy.
Yeah.
In life before the judges. Anybody who's like, because this has only been for 40 years, I think we've only had the judges or something like that.
I think it changes a little bit depending upon, at some point they've said it. But
somebody who's like 70, 80 years old is going to remember a time when they had their freedoms and then the World War III happened, whatever. So, so these bombs hit and I'm like, I can't believe the bombs have hit. And all these people are dying, but Judge Dredd points out that the Russians don't want to wipe out the population. They're going to want to enslave them.
Yeah.
And have them work for them. And I was like, okay, here's that word slavery again. And I always thought back to the robots. I don't know if I was not supposed to, but this was a real moment where I was like, oh, so we can't enslave the humans, but it's okay to enslave the robots, whatever. Anyway, none of that really matters. But anyway, every page was just shocking. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm like, how many progs is this going to go on for? 4? They're going to turn the tide of war after 3 or 4 progs, and then they'll beat the Russians. No, everything just gets worse and worse. There's a shocking moment where a bunch of refugees try to leave the city to go to the cursed earth, the radioactive wasteland. It's like that bad. And then there's a storm blows them back into the city.
Yeah.
Like every time... And it's almost ridiculous. And I even wrote down the line. Somebody says it's raining people or something.
Yeah.
Worst storm I've ever seen. It's raining citizens out there.
Yeah.
It's almost a moment of really black humor, but it's so grim. Sometimes I was like, aren't these people getting radiation poisoning or something? Yes, some of them are. In some places, the radiation has reached them in the city. But, by the way, there's a lot of stuff in this story, too. I noticed there's a radiation sweeper called the T-1000. And this scene looks very much like the T-1000s in Terminator. They're called T-1000s in Terminator. And there are these big tanks rolling over skulls across the battlefields and stuff. It really looks... Yeah, it looked very similar. Anyway... Oh, yeah, so this to me was where it cemented a lot of radiation victims so they come across a bunch of radiation victims, Dredd and the judges, and they're like, we're suffering, kill us. And Dredd and his crew say, request granted, and they laser them to death. There's no moment of consideration, there's no moral, I don't want to kill these people.
Yeah.
These are innocent people that are suffering. There's no moment of, I wish we could do something else. There's none of that. It's just next panel.
And the next panel, they're in a different part of the city where there's no radiation.
Yeah.
So I think, the understanding of what nuclear winters and that might, be was a bit here and there. The science of it.
But that's true. But this was peak
Cold War,
and we were reading a lot about, even as a kid, I would have been 10, 11, 12 years old, 85, 86, was reading all the time, what is nuclear winter, what is this? And there were these movies on TV, I think they had Threads in the UK, and where the animation where the wind blows, or when the wind blows. All that, there was one in the US too, it was called The Day After. So it was kind of it was probably all wrong, but it was definitely they were thinking about it. And it was like, so there's only one prog where they actually wear radiation suits to enter an area.
Yeah. Well, going back to that thing you said about the how matter of fact they are about sort of kind of executing these people to put them out of the misery. There was another one where it's barely explained, but they've put a bunch of citizens in a pit and they're collaborators, and they just execute them.
Yeah.
And Dredd, or one of the judges, throws a traitor's sign on them, or some piece of paper. I don't know. I don't know what that's going to do, but it's just so. As a kid, that stuff was shocking to me.
It was shocking to me now.
As an adult, too.
I'm 47, and I was like, I cannot believe this happened.
Yeah.
And when he shot the radiation victims without even thinking about it and just saying request granted, what a thing to say. Why say anything? But he says request granted and kills them.
Is it humor? It's black, but
were the audience supposed to find it humorous? I don't know, but I was like, it can't go further than this. This is, and no, it went much further.
Yeah.
And when he kills people in the pit, because it reminded me of the story, maybe it was Chris Earth or Robots, where he's like, we can't just kill people. He says something like that. There's a line early on where he's like, we can't. You're gonna have to serve 10 years or something.
I don't recall Dredd ever saying that.
No, I'm gonna have to go back and reread them to find that line. But it was really, this is like, they're just putting him in the pit, and they're literally judge, your executioner, your collaborators, you're all dead.
Yeah.
This is nothing compared to. I also want to say we should mention Ezquerra draws this whole storyline.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love all the other artists. Boland, when he comes on, I read the Dredd, the Judge Death storyline, specifically because I wanted to read the Boland stuff, and it's mind blowing, and it's easy to see how he was poached so quickly to go over and do Camelot 3000. It's just so awesome, but Ezquerra really can draw any goddamn thing.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where a missile goes into a swimming pool in an underground bunker, and he's drawn this, and I'm like, can you imagine asking an artist, okay, there's a missile lodged in the wall of the swimming pool underground, how do you even... I would be so pissed off as an artist, and he's able to draw anything, and he's got a kind of shaky inking style that is really perfect for this very grim, very ugly storyline.
Yeah. The thing I love about him is that he also, you can see the dirt in the surroundings, like the uniforms are tattered and ragged, and one of the great things about reading it in black and white on newsprint is that compared to, say, the modern day now where everything's in full colour on nicer paper or digital, you just miss that kind of grime in that. And
even the smell of the paper.
Yeah,
really.
Well, absolutely. Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other thing with Ezquerra, I should say, is that he had been absent from 2080 for a long time.
Right.
He sort of was involved in the creation of the character, the designs, and drew a first episode, but I think that wasn't published, and Mike McMahon was brought on and told to draw like Ezquerra, which he did for a fair while before, finding his own amazing style. And I think Ezquerra and Wagner walked away from it at the beginning. Wagner came back, and then later on Ezquerra came back. I think he did have some work in some of the early progs, but it was around Apocalypse Now. It was like, man, this guy is drawing this whole story, and then he becomes a mainstay in the prog from there until his passing.
Right.
And he's still drawing that realistic proportion skinny Dredd, which I love.
I love it too.
I don't like the bulked up steroid Simon Bisley sort of version, which came about, and I did like his work, but all these other artists started emulating that, and I didn't like it as much.
Yeah, I will say that Bisley, his work in I always thought it was Bisley, but anyway, his work in Judgment on Gotham is the highlight of his career. It's the best he's ever done, and I talked on other episodes where we've talked about Bisley's work. I keep getting burned on him. Like, I keep buying a new Bisley comic thinking, oh yeah, Bisley, he's so great. And it's never as good. Even his Lobo stuff, which I love, is not at the level of that painted art he did on Batman Judge Dredd with the glistening. There's always that pinpoint of light on, like, glistening on a muscle or on a helmet. It's actually a bit like Corbin. It's so three-dimensional on that book. Was just great. So I think but you're right. He does draw a bigger Dredd because that's just the way he draws, and he had to fight. He had to fight Batman, so he has kind of an excuse. But Ezquerra drawing him skinny was. It almost wouldn't work if he was a muscular Dredd, being kind of this hero in this landscape, and part of it is. I mean, when he shoots the prisoners, when they shoot the people in the pit, you're like, every prog, and we should also mention, which we haven't, each story, each installment is only 6 pages, 8 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got to get to a cliffhanger at the end of every 8 pages. It's really crazy, but you really feel like every chapter I was like, they're on a war footing. It's full on war. Nuclear bombs have hit, and every decision he makes is like, I'm not thinking about the morality of this. I'm not going to have any qualms about it. There's a scene where Judge Anderson, they need to get these missile launch codes from this Russian, and they bring in Judge Anderson, who's psychic, and he's like, go into his brain and find out what the codes are. And she's like, yeah. And she's never like, this isn't ethical or anything like this. So this is war.
It's war, yeah.
We've got to do this. We have to protect the U.S. from being taken over and enslaved. It's the bottom line. Doesn't matter who we kill or what. And in fact, and then it reaches a total head at the end of it, when the solution is that Dredd gets a hold of the Russian nukes, because the U.S. nukes have been destroyed, and launches them on Mega City 1 and kills, and it's said 2-3 times, they say the words, 500 million people. Yeah. Now, I read an issue of The Punisher by Garth Ennis many years ago where he killed an island of 5,000 people, and I was like, this, and it was almost a joke, and it was like, okay, this is funny, they were all criminals or whatever. But this is 500 million civilians.
Yeah, civilians.
Who didn't launch the war, didn't care about it. They aren't part of the military apparatus that is just making these decisions. But as far as Dredd's concerned, this is the thing that is going to stop the war.
Oh, and this goes back to that killing the radiation sickness victims, where he's told, you can't do that. That's 500 million people, or however many it is. That's one of the Sov judges. And his answer to that is pressing the button, request denied.
Request denied, yes.
Yeah, which is just, it's just stated full stop. It's not an exclamation mark, it's just like, this is matter of fact, I'm doing this.
Oh my God.
Which, I mean, I haven't read every single story, but I know they harken back to what he did in that moment many times in other stories.
Well, I feel like every story, because after this I read America, which is about the anti-democracy story, let's call it. And that, to me, felt like that's... Where can you go? After you kill 500 million people, civilians, was this the only solution? Was there no other way to stop the Russian assault on the U.S.? I don't know. The story is not... It doesn't tell us... It doesn't show us Dredd thinking about other ways, what other way could be. But I feel like every story after that, that's the Dredd. This is the Dredd. Like, the Dredd that's in America is the Dredd that pushed that button.
Yeah.
Those anti-democracy stories. That's the Dredd that was like, because he says, what are the lines in the American stories? They're like, democracy is not for the people, or democracy is wrong. This is stupid.
We've tried it.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
All those really fascist things that.
Yeah. And he says at the start of America, I'm paraphrasing, but there's a big statue of a judge in New York, or the New York part of Mega City 1, and there's the Statue of Liberty still there, but he likes that the tower, the statue of the judge towers over Liberty because that's the way it is.
Yes. Right.
Justice towers over liberty and freedom and what have you. But look, it probably does shape his character going forth, I think, a lot from that whole storyline, because it's like he'll do anything to protect his city, I guess.
Did you read that when it came out? Or later?
Apocalypse War I read, and Blockmania I read probably almost at the same time, because I was getting issues here and there, so it was a little bit out of order. But I think I even read the end of Apocalypse War before I read some of the earlier parts. But, it is kind of episodic, where there's, this issue there dealing with this issue and so forth.
Do you remember how old you are and what your reaction might have been?
I was very shocked at the request
Dredd killing
denied part. Yeah, just the... And it was almost like, when I was a kid, we were like, well, it's been about 40 years since World War II. Aren't we due for another one? And there's all this tension between America and Russia, and you're like,
I feel like request denied is the moment, for me, if I was personally reading, I can't speak for anyone else. If I'd been reading this as a kid, I'd be like, yeah, Judge Dredd, awesome. He's going to go around, he's going to fight these robots, fight these mutants in the wasteland. Okay, fine. Now you did this request granted, he kills these people, okay. But Dredd's Dredd, okay, and he kills these people. Yeah, I guess they were bad guys, okay. I feel like that request denied moment when he kills those 500 million people, and Ezquerra's drawn this too big splash of this city being destroyed. I think that might have been a turning point for me, where I've been like, okay, this is... Judge is not who I thought he was.
Right. No,
he's a different person.
Yeah, I didn't get that as a kid. It was still like you know, he's the only one that can save us, sort of thing.
Right.
So, and I mean, as that story progresses, I guess what they got out of that was there was a mention to that sort of turning the tide of things, because that's where the supply lines for Eastmeg were coming from. So
Right.
you started to see, I think, in one of the episodes after that, a bit more of a turning of the tide, fighting against the Sovs. But yeah, look, it's it's still an amazingly heavy storyline. You know, to read
so
now. So
I'm still in disbelief.
Yeah.
Talking about it now and recalling all the.
I mean, in the current prog right now in 2020. This year too. They're revisiting it, and they're basically doing sort of a flashback story to just another story of what he was doing during that time, where he was on a particular mission, and they just seem to keep, and it's Wagner again with a younger artist, and they just keep sort of coming back to, you know, that sort of bed for the story.
Yeah, and that's not even the last panel of the story. There's like a few progs after that, and it's not like he's thinking about it or worrying about it or feeling anything. I don't even think anyone mentioned. Does anyone say you just killed 500 million?
No, there's very little.
Only the Sovs, the Soviets, are like, hey, you can't do this. There's 500 million people. They're the only ones. And
I mean, you sort of get, at the very end, you get Soviet judges going back to that place,
right?
And there's nothing there. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd presume they're going back to radioactive death, but it's not explicitly said. But I mean, in later stories, they do kind of address the, you know.
Oh yeah, because the radiation would actually, I think the climate would bring that radioactive dust atmosphere over the U.S.
You would think so, and
you see it's going to blow up a city that has 500 million people in it. That's going to be big enough to affect the entire world.
Yeah, you would think so. But like I say, they're a bit hard and fast with the science of things. I mean, I think they talked about this in V for Vendetta as well. Like, there's a thing about a nuclear winter in that, but it's not perhaps science accurate. And you know, but anyway.
What else did I? Oh yeah, so they have some. Oh yeah, also at the end of it, not only do they not really mention that, they have some prisoners of war, Soviet prisoners, that their solution is there's too many prisoners, we can't keep them here. Send them back to
nothing.
Eastmeg. To send them back to that radioactive wasteland.
Yeah, I mean, you see a panel where there's just little figures on the edge of a big hole in the ground. So yeah.
What else did I note about this? Oh, they take Judge Dredd prisoner and the other judges, and they leave their helmets on. That was the one comic booky moment. You know, often, like, I read a G.I. Joe comic as a kid where they arrested Snake Eyes and they left him in jail with his mask on. That was the one. The rest of the time I was like, this is really...
I mean, the thing is, though, like, Judge Dredd, you know, he never reveals his face, right? And it's a thing for us as readers, but also in his world, people don't see his face, and it's kind of a known thing. He sleeps with his helmet on, you know. But occasionally, I know there was a strip where he was having a bath, and he didn't have it on. He just, you know, it was in silhouette.
Right. Well, there is... one thing I did want to mention earlier was there was a thing where I think it was in The Day the Law Died, he gets shot in the head, and you see the bullet exit. So he's in surgery. You don't see his face because he's blocked. They blocked it so the surgeons are in front of him. Right. Fine, okay. It's typical kind of thing. We've seen this kind of thing before. But I did think at that moment, I was like, oh, that's so... They just do surgery and bring him back to life. So I'm like, okay, so they've reduced the stakes to 0 in a very early Judge Dredd story, so he can never be killed. But actually, I never felt like... I don't want to say I felt like he could have been killed, but like oh no, Judge Dredd might die. I never thought that, but he did feel like, especially Apocalypse War, it was almost like you had to ramp it up that high. If you can just heal anything, grow back arms, and a guy gets shot in the head, just bring him back to life, you really need to have something that massive.
I mean, the other thing, at the beginning of Apocalypse War, they kill off Judge Giant in the Blockmania.
Let's talk about that, actually. Yeah. So that was a... so we haven't talked about Blockmania much, which is kind of the lead-in to Apocalypse War, where... And it's very, is the word disarming? Because it's kind of a funny story in some ways, because all of these building towers, these high-rise residential towers, go to war with each other. Now, we're told this happens sometimes, but now it's going all out. For some reason, all these alliances are being formed. Everybody's killing each other. They don't know why. There's a bit of a mystery behind that. But the blocks have all these really funny names. Like, they're usually named after some celebrity. Usually not even a great celebrity. Like, it might be, I don't know who. But anyway.
There's a lot of Ricardo Montalban in there.
Yes, there's a lot of Ricardo Montalban. Like, I'm from Ricardo Montalban block, and they're at war with, Estelle Getty block or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's quite funny in that way, but then, Judge Giant, who was a major character in Cursed Earth, is just killed in a couple of panels. He's just he's shot, and then Judge Dredd finds a body, and that's the end of it. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, so I wasn't expecting that.
No, and it's final. That's it. He's dead.
That's final, yeah. You're like, are they going to bring this guy back or something? Yeah. No, and I was actually, it kind of surprised me. So the Blockmania lead-in doesn't really, you don't get it, until at the very end, we learned that this is a Russian plot to kind of soften up Mega City 1 so they're not prepared for the attack when it comes. But until that point, you're like, okay, it's just another kind of adventure story. It's kind of fun. It's really well paced and it's got all that kind of stuff in it, but it doesn't seem that relevant until you get to the end of it, and then it's like a necessary part of Apocalypse. But the death of Judge Giant, that's a good point. That was really... Yeah,
and he was also time with another strip early on. We had Harlem Heroes, Black Aeroball Future Sports strip from the first issue, first prog. And I can't remember, I think it was his grandfather was the leader of that team. So, and you actually had him as an old man in one of the Judge strips. So
that's interesting because I didn't know he was a black character until Ballin drew him. So halfway through Cursed Earth, I was just like, "This is another judge."
Well, what about his jive talking and Day
well,
the Lord died?
This is the thing because he kept calling Judge Dredd baby.
Yeah,
and I was like, "Why? This is a bit weird." But he wasn't drawn in a way that made me think. Until Ballin drew him, I was like, "Oh, this is a."
I can't remember. One of the artists thought Judge Dredd was black in the early days, like maybe pre-50 progs. It might have been Massimo Bellardinelli, but one of those artists, and so he would draw him with perhaps more prominent lips or something. Yeah. But it's a black and white comic, so you just...
Yeah, it's very hard to tell. And only Ballin had mastered the shading and the facial structure in a way that, like, that was really...
Yeah, he was a bit more specific, I guess, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What else? Apocalypse War, another thing I want to mention is they use the metric system. That was a real shock. It's hard to imagine British writers setting a story in the U.S. where they're talking about kilometers and meters and kilograms and stuff, but...
I didn't pick up on that, but
little
Wagner is American from birth. I don't know, he
that's right.
moved to Scotland at a young age,
so
but...
this goes back to the baby, the thing about saying baby. And I always thought, for some reason, Mega City 1 was in England. It never struck me that it was in the U.S. I don't know when I finally realized that it was actually like New York.
Yeah.
On down. But there was a line in, I think I wrote, it was in The Day the Law Died, "We've come to slam your butt in pokey, mister." And I was like, is this what, this isn't an American character, so this is a British writer who's forgotten how to say, "We're going to throw your ass in the slammer." And we've come to slam your butt in pokey, mister. And I was like, okay, so there were a few moments like that. Because the dialogue was so interesting because, again, like the ethnic stereotype stuff. And the baby was... He knows what he's doing. He really knows what he's doing.
Some of that might be Pat Mills. I know some of his episodes had some of that. But the ethnic stereotypes, that would happen in a lot of other strips as well.
Yeah.
So, all manner of ethnicities would kind of get reduced to caricature, and But
I think America's reduced to a character, especially in Fast Food Wars.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the Mafia in Las Vegas and Cursed Earth. Yeah. So I think, it's hard to place that stuff. But he was right on with the dialogue with the baby stuff, and I didn't realize it until Ballin drew it. I was like, oh, that's why that guy is supposed to be a kind of dive-talking guy. Now, I did suggest that we do America. Now, I read this in a trade paperback called, I think it was called, I don't know if it was Essentials or...
Yeah.
So it has a bunch of stories in it leading up to America, and then a few others. And these stories were all mostly about this pro-democracy movement that starts up, and then the judge is put down, and then this story about America, she's this character whose name is America, and she's part of the democracy movement. Her name is America, and and the Statue of Liberty is much smaller. You know, then the judge statue. There's a lot of on the nose kind of stuff in this story. But I would say it's a collection of like 5 stories all around this one theme. It's really depressing reading, but
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, it's really grim. It's like Judge Dredd is like there's no place for democracy. I would say they break the law in order to keep democracy down, and they use blackmail tactics. Like they threaten to throw this man's wife is an important figure in the pro-democracy movement, and they kill her. I think maybe she assassinated or arrested. I don't remember, but they basically come to the husband.
She's involved in a terrorist thing, and then they're making martyrs of themselves.
Right. That's right.
There's no.
And then they go to the husband, and they're like, "You have to come out and say that she come out against what your wife said.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, we're going to put your 2 kids in the judge's program.
Yeah.
Surely this stuff isn't legal. So to me, this was the line where
it is legal though, because he had the paperwork. So they're basically writing the laws or creating the laws to suit their whatever they need, you know.
Right. Well, the line of Judge Dredd, which we haven't said, is "I am the law." That's like his catchphrase.
Yeah.
You could call it catchphrase, but "I am the law." Any judge could say it, I guess, and that's what they say goes.
He's the only one that says it from memory.
I don't think anybody else says it, but I'm assuming they're allowed to say it.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe they don't say it.
Would the other judges not consider themselves the law? So they're using all these strong arm tactics, blackmail, horrible stuff. It's very hard reading, especially, but I think it's the perfect end point almost. If you know, like if you look at the beginning with the robots and the aliens and all that stuff, and the things we're building up, and then killing 500 million people to get to this stage where you say only what the judges say matters. And if you litter, you can get shot to death, depending, if the judge decides that's the case.
Yeah.
There's no due process. This is kind of... I feel like I really loved Wagner in this moment as much as I felt gross. If you know what I mean. I loved the writing. I loved that he was like, I'm going to take this here. I love that 2000 AD was brave enough to say, like, yes, this is okay. Imagine DC doing this with Batman, being somebody actually confronting him about not addressing poverty in Gotham City or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would never happen. And it amazes me that it did happen in this. And when I got to it, I was shocked by the Apocalypse War, just by the events of it. I was shocked by the finale. In this, I was shocked that they were actually like, yes, this is the character. Because again, as I said at the beginning, when I came into Judge Dredd, I thought it was going to be fascist without knowing it was fascist. It knows it, especially at the end. And John Wagner is almost like, I think you were saying before, I think he was almost pointing the finger at the readers. Like, you thought this guy was a good guy, but he can do whatever he wants. There's no democracy in the world that he lives in.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be hero worshipping him.
No.
And pretending to be Judge Dredd on the playground or whatever.
It's not... I mean, it's fine to read it in a story, but it's not what we want in our world.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's...
In fact, it's important to read about it in a story. It's like, this is what happens if you let the judicial process go in this direction.
Yeah. And it's scary because you see... I've seen it in some countries, people... these heavily armoured uniforms of these special force police are starting to look more and more like what you see in this comic strip.
Yeah,
but,
right.
In some places it's becoming more reality, But there was, amongst those stories, I read that collection as well, there's the one where Dredd says he says, let's do it, let's have a vote.
He allows a referendum.
Yeah.
Somehow it's his, that's in that collection. He has control over that decision. It seems to be him, because the other judges are like, we got to get rid of Dredd because he's allowing this referendum to happen.
Yeah.
It seems to be his choice.
Yeah.
So they have a referendum. This is also, yes, okay, I feel better for Dredd, but again, at the end of the story, they have a vote. I think they find out that, should we have democracy or stay with the judges system? I think 33% of 40% of people actually vote. 60% don't vote. And only 9% of that actually vote for democracy. And the other 81% vote for the judges.
Yeah.
And it's so...
And you see in that story, it cuts to scenes of, just civilians watching television.
Change the channel. That keeps coming. That comes up in other stories too. It might have even been in The Day the Law Died or something. There were scenes where you just see families like, what is this crap on TV? Just change the channel.
And the other thing is, this is loosely tied, but when I was rereading Apocalypse War, I noticed there's a parallel between, I think it's Kazan, the Russian leader, saying that, when they say, one of his assistants says, we should address the people about what's going on. He says, what do you think the people have to do with this decisions or anything? They don't matter. And Dredd says a similar thing, like about, someone says we should talk to the people, and he's like, do you think they care? Because at that point they're all under the influence of this drug that's making them attack each other. And I think there's a sort of a parallel there with what's happening in these democracy stories. Most people don't care; they just want to live. Yeah, I mean the story's called the Devil You Know.
Right. Yes, that's right. Yeah,
and that's I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Give me the comfortable life. Let me carry on with this. I don't know what democracy will offer.
Yeah, well, it's like, it's very much what we're going through right now. I think all over the world where people are like the low voter turnouts. I guess it's not a problem so much in Australia where you're legally obliged to vote, but even in the U.S. last election, I thought, okay, this time they're going to turn out to vote, and it was still like low numbers compared to the number of registered voters or legally eligible voters. The turnout was low. It always is in the U.S. for maybe pessimism, like we can't change anything, or I don't know what it is, but here it's definitely apathy, and it was too real, if you know what I mean. It was like, and it just struck me that Wagner's. I really don't. Again, I went in expecting just a kind of good adventure kind of comic, some fun times, laser blasts. This guy who's a fascist, but the writers don't realize it. But he's such a great writer. I don't think I read of the stuff I read. I mean, there was only a few other fill-ins by other writers. I think even maybe the Fast Food Wars were not done by him. They might have been by someone else. And there's a little bit of Garth Ennis at the end of the America collection.
I like those Ennis stories, and I know he's been he said that he didn't feel he was a good fit for writing Dredd.
Well, I think they were okay, but I definitely think they were weaker than the Wagner stuff. Like, I'd read hundreds of pages of Wagner at this stage, and I get to Ennis, and he's like, I love this city, and to me it was just like a baffling motivation. You know what I mean? And I was like, I think structurally I liked it, but in terms of understanding the character and just having no redeeming, the truth is that there's nothing redeeming about Dredd, even if that alien Grok that he was in the Cursed Earth. I don't know. I felt like there was something. It was not Ennis's character. I think it was a good story, but it's Wagner's character. Maybe Grant.
I mean, he said that in so many words. Yeah, he just felt he was trying too much to perhaps be Wagner, or
Yeah, and even when Alan Moore auditioned for 2000 AD, when he sent in sample scripts, they're like, well, we already have this guy, John Wagner, writing them, or whatever, and they're like, at that time, they were like, can you imagine Alan Moore, Judge Dredd, right? It blows the mind to think of it, but so I think it's really, even, and he used all those fake names, but it's really, I feel like I feel like I underestimated what a monumental piece of writing it was going to be. Especially through Apocalypse War and the America stuff, the democracy stuff. It's not, he doesn't shy away from any of that. What you would expect him to shy away. You would expect him to be a quote-unquote comic book writer. Yeah.
But I think back then as well, there was less pressure to sustain it, because UK comics would typically get absorbed by another title at some point. No one expected it to exist in the year 2000. Hence its name. It was just like, this is about, we're cashing in on Star Wars. This is about science fiction. And at some point, this is going to be joined up with Valiant or Battle or some other comic. So I guess there was less pressure to have to, maintain the status quo. You can throw in any sort of wild ideas, kill off characters, whatever. I guess the only constant is like try not to kill off the main character if you can.
Yeah. Well, and even if you shot him in the head, he'd come back. I will say, again, I think Batman Judge Dredd, Judgment on Gotham, is worth a look. Because it really is like Judge Dredd is the law. And he's like, I'm going to arrest Batman for carrying weapons because he's got the Batarang and stuff.
Yeah.
And Batman is like, what about justice? Like, he's a vigilante. He's not the law. And there's a really interesting... I think Alan Grant was writing Batman at the time it came out. So these were guys that knew Batman and Judge Dredd. And they really understand the difference between the two characters, and I reread that as well. It's a really cool book, and the Bisley art is just to die for, really.
Yeah. I remember, it was pre-internet for me when that came out, but sort of reading about it here and there, and like, I hope I can get this in my little town here. And I did actually have to order it in from somewhere, and it was pretty exciting, it was. Because back then, different worlds of comics, they just didn't cross over, especially American and British, that just was quite a rarity, so...
Yeah. It was an intercompany crossover that wasn't Marvel DC. That was shocking at the time, too. That was really, like, holy cow. So you're still reading it?
Yeah, I dipped out for a long time, and then I came back maybe several years ago, and then I've realised that you still got Wagner involved at various points of the year. He said recently, he did retire, but he just, and he finds writing a bit harder to get into, but once he gets into it, he loves it. So he's still kind of steering the character, and you've got people like Rob Williams that write, they've written some of the epics. Mike Carroll's another writer. I really like Mike Carroll's stuff, and Rob Williams, but they tend to have created little worlds in the Dredd verse that they kind of steer their own characters in there, and so I think at times when they might consult John Wagner, like, can we do something with... they've used the character Judge Hershey. She's had sort of a spin-off, and so... But Wagner's still the man sort of steering the ship, so I don't know, presumably the character will go forever. I know there's been various instances where... because he's a clone, perhaps another clone could replace him.
Right.
But they did have another clone took the badge Dredd, so he's basically the same character, but he just doesn't have the experience that this guy, the original guys had through all these multi-epic adventures. So one of the things I love about it in recent years, especially when you had Wagner, Ezquerra collaborations, is that they brought in caption boxes where you get a bit of his internal monologue. And he would talk about how he felt about things, which you'd never never get that in the early days. or and other writers, sometimes they'll do it, but not so much, and you'd get to experience his interactions with younger clones of the same genetic material as him, plus he's got a niece. His clone brother, before he killed him, had an affair, and that produced this woman who's still in the stories occasionally. The thing is that they have these characters that'll disappear for years, and then suddenly they'll turn up in a story and like, oh, what happened to this character? And to me, some of those are the most fascinating stories going on now. They'll still have the crime of the week or the wacky, one-off things, and those are okay. But when you get a bit of that internal monologue, how does it feel to be this old and trying to do what you do? That's the fascinating stuff for me.
Judge Dredd has been published by 2000 AD, IDW, and various other publishers. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, Emmett talks with Dr. Matt Finch about Al Ewing and Joe Bennett's The Immortal Hulk. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.